Today wraps up ISTEP testing across the state of Indiana. While the debate on standardized tests continues, the test measures the success of both students and teachers.
An entire year's worth of teaching comes down to just one test. Beth Johns is principal at Highland Elementary School, and like other educators, the significance of ISTEP testing isn't lost on Johns or her teachers.
ISTEP is a standardized testing that is high-stakes testing. Start working from the first day of school towards that learning and knowledge so we can do our best on the test.
In addition to the basic core subjects, teachers work with students on certain skills that will help them best succeed when taking the test.
We have some strategies in place that we practice regularly. We're doing simple 6 writing. We saw huge increases last year with our writing scores on the applied skills test because of implementing the simple 6 strategy.
Methods like simple 6 give students a rubric for making their writing more interesting. Another trick, called RIPS check, is an acronym students follow to make sure their problem-solving skills are thorough. Teachers also give students periodic assessment tests to figure out how well they're learning the material and where more work is needed. And after all this work is completed and it's finally test time, John says it's important to get the kids excited and make them feel confident. The day before testing started this year, Highland held a Family Feud-style pep assembly with questions geared at best test-taking practices.
They were just fired up. As they left, we gave them a packet of Smarties as they were leaving the gym. It was a feel-good experience. It got the kids ready. We told them they've worked hard this year. We believe in them. They've learned so much. Now's the time to shine.
Other educators take a more subtle approach, fearful of putting too much pressure on students. But both schools of thought agree the stakes are high. Students, teachers, and school districts are judged on the results. Reporting for Education Matters, I'm Jennifer Cahill.
And join me now is EVSC's Assistant Superintendent of Performance Assessment Research, Susan McDowell-Riley. Susan, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Tell us about your role. You play a very important role in the EVSC in our community. Tell us what's happening in your office.
Well, right now we're busy with ISTEP and other standardized assessments that we have in process. And one of our major processes is to make sure that the materials are in the school to answer questions that are revolving around ISTEP, and then also to get the ISTEP materials packaged and sent to the state for scoring.
It's a big operation.
Yes, we're handling thousands of testing documents.
You know, earlier Jennifer reported on the 80,000 tests that could potentially be invalidated. So when you talk about performance and assessment, I would assume that through that process, test security is a critical piece. And what measures are in place to prevent that happening in the EVSC? And then I'd like for your perspective on this whole issue statewide.
Well, we have a policy in place in the EVSC, a security policy, and test booklets are not put in the hands of teachers until 24 hours prior to the testing event. And teachers are given the administration manual well in advance so that they can study how to administer the test, but they don't actually have the test questions until right before the test. And then the test booklets are locked in a secure central location every evening so that it's really important that test questions are not, that security around them is not violated. Additionally, we have guidelines that each teacher reads and signs that acknowledges that they've read the guidelines in terms of test security.
Standardized testing obviously has been a polarizing issue. A lot of people debate the importance of this. Then there's this view that teachers have started teaching to the test. Could you talk a little bit about and distinguish teaching to the test versus teaching standards?
Well, ISTEP measures the state standards, and so we believe that if you're teaching students at the state standards, you're preparing your students for ISTEP as well. It's really important to make sure that the students have a grasp of the state standards, and by making sure that those are involved in instruction, I think the students then do well on ISTEP.
The other thing we hear is that we're over testing. How important do you think the role of ISTEP plays in the learning for students?
The information we get back on ISTEP really involves a lot of information that teachers can use. There is information relative to if students mastered state standards. So ISTEP helps give us information. It gives parents feedback on whether students have mastered certain skills that are really important building blocks for their future knowledge in school.
Susan, I know a lot of people know this, but you play such an important role not only in the EVSC, but for the state of Indiana in developing protocols and around assessment and performance, and we appreciate the work you're doing. Indiana rolled out an important model recently, and that is the growth model. Could you tell us a little bit more about what that means for students in our schools?
Well, the growth model will give us information it's never given us in the past. For example, we will be able to see if a student has not only passed ISTEP, but has a student made progress towards passing or above and beyond passing. So we can measure student growth from year to year, which is really valuable information for students, parents, and teachers. We want to make sure passing ISTEP is not enough. We want to make sure that students are maximizing their potential, and the way to do that really is to monitor student growth, to make sure that each student is achieving a year's growth within a school year.
So how does that contrast from the previous model and what we were doing prior to the growth model?
The previous model let us see what percentage of students were passing, and that's really what the accountability was based on. Did you have a certain percentage of students passing? Now what we look at, how many students are not only passing, but how many students are making a year's growth. So there is a difference. We do have students who are making good progress every year, but perhaps cannot quite pass the test. So the growth model lets us look to see if they're growing to the extent possible and how much more they need to grow in order to pass.
So in other words, in the previous model, if a student was above the cut score and actually passed the exam, that student's performance didn't equate and didn't register with the school's performance moving forward. It was just that the student had passed.
Correct. Once the student passed, improving scores didn't matter under the old accountability model, and under the new one, it is very important that each student improves his or her score every single year and demonstrates growth rather than just passing.
Well, we appreciate all the work you're doing, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Great. When we come back, we're going to talk about how teachers are learning and the role of professional development in the EVSC. We'll be right back.